It takes less than 3 minutes from the moment a Russian satellite pinpoints your location to where a ballistic missile traveling at 5 times the speed of sound slams into the ground you just left. That's what Ukraine's F-16 pilots are up against. Every takeoff is a bet against physics. Every landing a race against radar. And for a long time, the jets were losing. But not anymore. Because now, Ukraine has a trick. One that doesn't involve new weapons, stealth paint, or satellite jamming. It's a game of movement, decoys, and surviving by never being still. Let's just call it a wartime sleight of hand. It was built in secret, deployed in silence, and it's a new way to fly without being found. And it might just keep Ukraine's Air Force alive. Welcome to the new war in the skies, where surviving Russian missiles isn't about flying fast. It's about staying invisible. For more than a year, Ukraine's top military and political leaders lobbied Western allies for one particular aircraft. Not for more Soviet-era MiGs, and not just additional drones, but for the F-16. This wasn't just about adding another fighter jet to the arsenal. It was about enhancing Ukraine's air capabilities in battle. And the answer was a Western-built fourth-generation jet that could lock onto Russian cruise missiles mid-air. One that could intercept, disrupt, and retaliate. By 2024, the first wave of deliveries arrived, with Denmark and the Netherlands leading the way. Soon after, Belgium, Norway, and others committed to supplying more jets. All told, over 60 aircraft were pledged throughout multiple bilateral deals. And to support these aircraft, Ukrainian pilots were fast-tracked through intensive training programs across the United States, the United Kingdom, and Romania. But there was a catch. These jets had been designed to operate from well-maintained NATO air bases, complete with hardened aircraft shelters, structured logistics chains, and most importantly, zero threat of bombardment. Ukraine, however, was a nation under constant missile attack. The moment these jets touched down on Ukrainian soil, they became immediate high-value targets. Russian satellites were scanning every inch of terrain. A stationary F-16 left exposed for too long was more than just a liability. It was a $63 million fireball waiting to happen. That stark reality forced Ukraine's defenders to abandon traditional air-based doctrine. Static aircraft were vulnerable. Mobility was survival. What came next wasn't just a clever workaround. It was a strategic pivot, not a new weapon, not a new aircraft system, but an entirely different operational philosophy. One that would give the F-16s a fighting chance to survive, take off, and strike back. In today's Ukraine, the F-16 can no longer be tethered to one airfield. The traditional doctrine of permanent runways, predictable schedules, and large stationary logistics hubs had been rendered obsolete by the realities of Russian satellite surveillance and high-speed missile attacks. In its place, a new approach had emerged. The new approach required less infrastructure and more improvisation. The radical shift in aircraft operations came from a collaboration between Ukraine's Ministry of Defense and the Come Back Alive Foundation. Together, they engineered a new mobile platform designed not just for convenience, but for survival, compact, self-contained, and wartime born. There are now two core module types that move in tandem with the F-16s. One is engineered for maintenance, the other built entirely for mission coordination. The maintenance units included a dedicated prep bay for weapons configuration, 2 vans used to arm the jets with precision equipment, and a transport truck for the necessary personnel. What once required a full 10 to 12 person ground crew has now been streamlined. Just 3 crew members can load ammunition, which is faster, quieter, and with significantly reduced exposure to enemy surveillance. The second complex supports planning and coordination. It serves as a mobile command hub, equipped with encrypted pre-flight briefings, real-time mission adjustments, and secure operator rest rotations. This isn't just about having gear on wheels, it's about mobility executed at a tactical scale. Now, this isn't about upgrading air bases, it's about eliminating the concept entirely. Now, F-16s can lift off from unlikely places, repurposed highways, overgrown runways from the Cold War, even hastily leveled farmland paved into makeshift tarmac. That is a warfare dream machine. But then again, dispersal and mobility alone don't win a war. To truly stay ahead of Russian precision strikes, Ukraine had to think beyond national borders, and they did this by drawing inspiration from a different kind of conflict, thousands of kilometers away. The concept of turning a highway into a runway wasn't born in Ukraine, but the urgency to make it real was. There was an urgency to make it work under missile fire and satellite surveillance that belongs to them entirely. In the Indo-Pacific, the U.S. Air Force has spent the past decade preparing for the unthinkable. A war where the first targets aren't tanks or troops, but runways, and in response, they built a doctrine called agile combat employment, a playbook built on scatter, speed, and survival. Jets launched from jungle pads, command centers moved onto roads, and refueling done in the shadows of island palm trees. Australia mirrored this approach. Sweden adapted it. But for Ukraine, there was no rehearsal window, no sandbox training operation, only a full-scale war where every hour grounded was an hour exposed, and every static base became a bullseye. So they borrowed what worked. But they didn't just adopt the model. They stripped it down, rewired it, and rebuilt it in real time with the help of a nonprofit, Come Back Alive, whose engineers and operators had no margin for error, no second chances, and no luxury of waiting for NATO doctrine to trickle down. And Tahraj Chamut, who leads the foundation, said it plainly. These F-16s were never meant to hide behind peacetime logistics, because every sortie is live, every airstrip temporary, and every missed launch a potentially fatal delay. The idea was heard in American and Australian military circles that survivability lies in movement, in being a ghost force that never stops shifting, became the heart of Ukraine's innovation, turning farmland into tarmac, tents into control centers, and highways into lifelines. This isn't doctrine, it's adaptation forged in fire. Not a strategy on a whiteboard, but necessity in the mud. And what emerged isn't just an operational shift. It's the world's first mobile F-16 war network, not built for show or theory or deterrence, but for survival. But just as you would have guessed, even survival has a shelf life, because as more jets touch down on Ukrainian soil, the pressure to protect, to scale, and to endure only gets sharper. When Ukraine received its first F-16s, it wasn't just taking delivery of jets. It was inheriting an entire aerial doctrine designed for peace. Standardized maintenance routines, fixed-base logistics, long runways with hardened shelters, and the assumption that the skies were mostly safe. Denmark and the Netherlands led the way, passing down their trusted fourth-generation fighters as they transitioned to F-35 fleets. Then became Belgium, Norway, and more on standby. But here's the catch. You can't just drop an F-16 into an active war zone and expect it to fly like it did back in peacetime Europe. Because every jet is a high-value asset that bleeds vulnerability the moment it sits still. And that's exactly why the mobile modules matter. Custom-built, battlefield-tested, and refined over multiple iterations, these compact units don't just support the jets, they extend their lifespan. By stripping down the supply chain, Ukraine reduced the rearm teams from a dozen to 3. They have prep times, and more importantly, they made sure that no jet has to sleep in the same place twice. Each mobile node is a self-contained ecosystem, encrypted comms, pre-flight planning, rapid fuel capability, and even bunk space for crews that need to vanish overnight. Even with its self-contained ecosystem, coordination is what turns survival into strength. Because an F-16 parked in a cow field is just another asset until it launches, joins formation, and becomes part of a larger strategic swarm. And for every jet that lands, Russia is watching. Ukraine knows that for this strategy to hold, every addition to its fleet must come with its own escape plan, its own movement logic, its own shadow route. So what started as a workaround, an improvised way to keep jets alive, has now become the go-to. Because in a war this fluid, the skies must be just as unpredictable as the terrain beneath them. There was a time when air power meant permanence. I am talking about fixed runways, massive hangars, and dozens of technicians working in daylight with the confidence that the skies belong to them. That world doesn't exist here. In Ukraine, the front shifts by the hour, erratic, unstable, and alive. And now, the Air Force shifts with it. What used to take months of concrete, cranes, and coordination now unfolds in mere hours. Highways have become runways, and even cracked farm roads have been repurposed into launch pads. This is not improvisation. It is a doctrine called agile combat employment. It began as a theory that was tested in US and Australian drills across Pacific Island chains. But in Ukraine, it's no longer a drill. American and Danish advisors helped shape the playbook, but it was Ukrainian defenders who rewrote it under missile attacks, under drone swarms, and under constant surveillance from Russian satellites. What started as a strategy for a future war is now a lifeline in a present one. They have adapted, and with every relocation, Ukraine's F-16s become harder to find, harder to target, and exponentially harder to stop. On the ground, Ukraine's F-16 strategy is built on scattering, each aircraft isolated, concealed, and parked in unpredictable places to minimize risk. But the moment the wheels lift off the runway, that strategy flips. In the sky, these jets don't fly solo, they converge. From the silence of separation comes the roar of coordination. What begins as a shell game on the ground transforms mid-air into a formation strike. Ukrainian pilots have mastered the art of living apart and fighting together. Each mission, pre-planned from inside compact mobile modules, is a choreographed dance of fuel checks, waypoints, time-on-target coordination, and fallback routes, all updated in real time through encrypted comms. This is no longer about individual jets surviving. It's about the fleet becoming more than the sum of its parts. Swarming is not chaos. It's Ukraine turning every sortie into a statement that even under constant surveillance, they can strike with unity. But coordinated strikes require more than tactics. They require resources. And as F-16s continue to arrive, a more urgent question emerges. Can Ukraine receive, ready, and retain them fast enough to keep up with the war's demands? Since early 2024, a new rhythm has emerged in Ukraine's war effort. A rhythm carried by the whine of jet engines and the thunder of new arrivals. First, it was Denmark and the Netherlands. Then came Belgium's promise. Norway followed. And behind each delivery, a message from the West that Ukraine wouldn't stand alone in the skies. Each one is a $60 million symbol of commitment, of strategy, of a shared stake in the outcome of this war. But even symbols bleed. And for all the steel and power packed in these fourth-generation fighters, every new jet also comes with new fragility. Because a jet that isn't trained, maintained, and protected is just another target. That's the part outsiders miss. You can't just land an F-16 in a war zone and expect it to thrive. Each aircraft needs trained pilots, ground crews, mechanics, pre-briefing systems, encrypted networks, spare parts, fuel, and everything. And all of it needs to move. Ukraine has spent the last year compressing all that into a set of mobile containers. Modules that can be driven, hidden, or deployed. Crews that can brief, reload, launch, and relocate before Russian satellites can lock on. This is the race inside the war. A race not just to receive jets, but to shelter them, protect them, and scale them. Because every aircraft lost isn't just a number, it's a pilot's life, a broken deterrent, a missed mission. And this leads to the bigger question. In a war that shifts with the wind and strikes with the speed of sound, can a handful of mobile modules and a scattered fleet of fighters actually tilt the balance? Ukraine's mobile F-16 strategy began as a battlefield workaround, a desperate fix. But in the crucible of this war, it evolved into something else, something bigger, a blueprint. They had to do this under fire, and the words on the street are that it's called a shell game. And this is the game. And in this game, the stakes are everything. Because the strategy isn't about overwhelming firepower. It's about staying invisible until it's time to strike. It's about being where the enemy isn't looking until it's too late. And it didn't come from the Pentagon. It came from people like Taras Chumu and the Comeback Alive Foundation. Civilians and soldiers who saw what wasn't working and built what was needed anyway. Because survival in war isn't handed down from stronger nations. It's carved out of those who can't afford to lose. And now, as Ukraine's skies fill with fighters that were never meant to live like this, one question remains. In the era of satellite war and missile supremacy, is this what air power will look like for the rest of us? Ukraine's war has reshaped expectations. From trench warfare to drone swarms, every corner of the battlefield has become a canvas for adaptation. And now, even in the air, necessity is dictating innovation. F-16s, once symbols of Western air dominance, were never meant to live like this, shuttling between pop-up bases, launching from converted roads, serviced by three-person mobile teams hiding beneath trees. But Ukraine didn't ask what was possible. They asked what was necessary. And then, they built it. All I can say now is that the future of air power isn't fixed. It moves. If you made it this far, thank you for sticking with us. There is more where this came from. Just subscribe to Project Aerospace and turn on notifications to stay in the loop.